back to Obsession Engineering for another decidedly cold day in the workshop for some more action on the SP1 Honda. So when I left last night, I'd left the oil cooler soaking in some Kohler to see if it had come up a little bit cleaner. So the first job is going to be give that a coat of looking at and see how it's come out. The Kohler trick hasn't really worked, if I'm honest. It's not really taken any of this tarnish off it. It was a bit of a punt really, but it was worth a go. We've not lost anything other than a couple of cans of Coke. So it's looking like there's not going to be a great deal I can do with the oil cooler. I'm going to try and very lightly clean it by hand to try and get rid of some of this discoloration. Thing is, it is actually clean. It's just a bit corroded and a bit grotty. So I'm going to give it a little bit of a clean by hand, see what we can do with it. And then I also need to clean up these oil pipes because these can definitely be made to look better. So the oil cooler was cleaning up just a little bit with a very light touch with some Scotch-Brite. Obviously I can't get in around the cooling fins and bits, but it was beginning to look a little bit better. Then I thought to clean underneath the bolt heads, I'd better take the bolts out, and one of them snapped off. So now I need to drill that out. So I've centre popped right in the middle of the head, well, right in the middle of where the head used to be, and I'm going to get the drill in, drill it out, and then I may have to re-tap the thread in the actual pipe. But we'll see what it looks like when I've drilled it out. So I've centre popped the hole, and I'm going to start with a real small drill bit. This is just over 2mm, just to get as a pilot hole. My centre pop mark wasn't perfectly central, so that's why I've just drilled at a slight angle to get that a bit better. Now I'm happy that we're a bit more central, we can actually go down. So that's drilled all the way through, so I'm just going to take it out now and see if we're actually still in the middle of the bolt out the other end. It's not brilliant, I'm not particularly central in the hole. So what I'm going to do next is drill out a little bit bigger so it takes the bulk of the material out, and hopefully that will take some strength out of it and I'll be able to wiggle the oil cooler away from the pipe. Not doing it especially tight in the vise because I just want to stop it moving, I don't want to damage it. Right, so now I've been able to separate the pipe from the cooler. Now I can actually get in and get this out a little bit easier because I can drill it back from the other side now, where I can get the hole a bit more central. If it comes to it, we can even put a longer bolt and a nut at the back to hold it together. It's not the end of the world, but it would be nice if I can recover the original thread. So there we go. In the end, I was managed to take enough material out that I could actually get a pair of grips on what was left of the bolt and wiggle it out the hole. So I've managed to recover the original thread. So now all we need is a new bolt, which isn't a bad thing because the old ones are a bit grotty and I had forgotten to send them to the platers. So I've got the oil pipes now removed, and I rubbed them with a bit of Scotch-Brite to prime them for painting, and they've actually come up surprisingly well. There is a little bit of light pitting on them in places, but most of the corrosion was sort of discoloration on the surface, and that's come off really quite nicely. So what I'm actually going to do is give them a thorough cleaning, and I might give them a little spray with some lacquer just to seal them, and then I'm just going to paint these sort of end bits that are looking a bit grotty. I'm just going to paint them black by hand, and then when they're on the bike, hopefully they'll look nice and original. So as well as the oil cooler pipes, I'm also painting the bracket that holds the oil cooler on and the fan on the back of the radiator, because it all looked a little bit grotty, so it'll look better with a coat of paint on it. That's probably not going to dry today, especially because it is rather cold in here. So I'm going to move on and do a few other bits. I've got a few brackets and bits I can reattach to the engine after being plated, and I could even put the exhaust pipes back on. While I wait for paint to dry, I fitted some brackets back onto the engine and a few nuts and bolts and bits. I've even put the radiator on the other side. And now we're going to move on to the most substantial performance addition that we're going to fit to the SP1, a slightly smaller front sprocket. As normal, these bikes are incredibly tall geared in first. It's, you know, to make them feel like a race bike where you want a big tall first gear and loads of close ratios after that. On the road, it is a bit of a pain though, because by the time you're doing 30 mile an hour, you've barely got the clutch out. It's a bit of a faff. So, what we're doing is we're going to throw away the 16-tooth front sprocket and fit a Renthal 15-tooth front sprocket. Now, earlier on in the build, I checked the chain, did a measurement of it using my blingy chain tool, and it's actually perfectly good. There's a tiny little bit of rust on sort of the end of the links that doesn't look perfect, but the chain itself is in good condition, so we don't need to worry about that. The rear sprocket's good, we just need to change the front sprocket. So I'm going to drop the 15 onto here, reset the chain tension, and then I can also put the clutch back on. So that's my new Renthal sprocket fitted. That was from B&C Express, available to anyone and everyone. I've also set the chain tension probably a little bit loose for now, but when I get somebody sat on it, so the swinging arm's sitting a little bit flatter, I can get a better measure on that. Eventually I will probably go around and actually just give a final clean around the chain, but that is that job done. So the next job is to put the front sprocket cover back on and put the slave cylinder back on. After removing 20 years worth of chain lube out the bottom of the sprocket cover, that's refitted along with the slave cylinder. And another modification we're doing is to fit a new hell braided hose. I mean, the clutch line, admittedly, if it deteriorates, it's not the end of the world. It's not like when you do an emergency stop, it's not going to stop. It's not as important, but obviously, as they degrade, bits of rubber float up and down them. They generally go off, so I think it's worth changing. And then we'll have a full set of matching shiny braided hoses. And who wouldn't want that? So that's my new clutch line fitted and bled up. It bleeds up quite easily because you're only moving one piston and your mass cylinder is a reasonable size. So that was fairly straightforward. The next job is to replace the little rubber boots on here, and I've actually got some new lock nuts for it as well, which will look considerably better. So I'm going to buzz the arm off. But the one thing to remember when you're doing this is that you want the length between the eyes to stay exactly the same, because if you lengthen or shorten that, it raises where the foot peg sits. So I want to have this exactly the same length. So before I take anything apart, I'm just going to get a tape and measure it. So I fitted the new rubbers and the new nuts, and just to give a sort of demonstration of how you would adjust the lever height if you wanted, the thread on this end is left-handed, the thread on that end is right-handed. So what you can do is spin the whole rod, and as the length of this alters, it alters how high the lever sits. So you can tailor your bike to fit, which is rather handy. That's new nuts fitted, new little boots fitted that look considerably better. It's these little details that make me rather happy when we're doing a project like this. I think the next thing on the list is probably to put the exhaust pipes on after I've been for biscuits. I think today we're on chocolate digestives. Dark chocolate, of course, because we're connoisseurs. The next thing to do is fit to the exhaust pipes. I'm going to fit the rear section first, just so I know where everything needs to end up sitting, and then I shall put the front in. I've checked the old exhaust gaskets and they actually look okay, so I'm going to reuse those. Going to put a smear of copper grease on the studs where the nuts go on, and then hopefully in years to come when the next person takes it off, it'll come apart easily again. So fitting the actual header pipe was nice and easy. Unsurprisingly, the man at Honda has made something of good quality. So the exhaust pipe all fitted together quite nicely. If we go under here, it fitted up into the collector really quite nicely. That was no problem at all. The slight problem came when I tried to start fitting the non-Honda bits, and the bolts sort of went in, but they weren't really lining up terribly well. So what I've had to do now is go back into the header pipe and where it collects into the front pipe, and I've loosened all the clamps off so that there's a little bit of play in the pipe. So now I can get the sort of link pipes on, give them a bit of a wiggle, and as I tighten everything up, hopefully it'll all fit correctly. So with everything loosened off, I could wiggle it enough that I can get all the bolts in and everything lines up fairly well, and when I stand behind the bike, they're pretty much even. I mean, they're not factory original Honda, these bits of pipe, and you can sort of tell by the quality of the fit, but they are shiny at least, so that'll have to do for now. I suppose the next thing to do is put on my nice new re-sleeved shiny silencers. Woohoo! We've got one nice shiny looking exhaust pipe on this side, and we've got another one on this side. They're looking absolutely tip-top. They might not be original, they might not be fancy Akrapovics, but they are shiny and they actually sit in the correct orientation, so that's good. Even better that they're both in the same material. So that's looking absolutely spiffing. Yeah, this bike's actually beginning to look like a proper motorbike. It's been another really good day down at the workshop. I'm really pleased with how the bike's coming along. It just looks so much nicer when I put it back together with all the shiny bits on it. I know everything mechanically is really good, and it's actually not far away from being a complete working motorbike again. And it's just really, really nice to see it sort of brought back from the brink. Yeah, I'm really happy with how it's going so far. So join me again next time when we get even closer to the end of the project.